Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining, everybody. My name is Liz Pena, a marketing specialist here at Verity IT. Like the title suggests, today's webinar will be covering the future of cybersecurity and how to best protect your business in the upcoming year. Today, we're joined by Mike DePalma to discuss the future of cybersecurity further. Mike represents Datto, frequently presenting alongside members of the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI. His objective through these presentations is to connect with business owners and IT professionals and educate them on current cyber threats and the role business continuity plays in combating these threats. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
All right, thank you so much for having me. All right, so let's just kick things off here. And I think this is obviously one of those topics that you hear a lot about. It's got the buzzword to it in terms of cybersecurity and where it's headed. So I kind of want to break things down into the landscape and what that looks like and you know what everybody could do moving forward. Very briefly about myself, Mike DePalma, the Senior Channel Development Manager at Datto. So we're a backup disaster recovery company. We're based out of Connecticut, about 40 miles east of Manhattan. And you know, I go around the country doing seminars like this, sitting on panels, as was mentioned earlier, with some folks from governmental agencies. And this has been the topic that every single presentation has been surrounding. We've been around for about 15 years, up over 2,100 employees worldwide, and we've got a network of 9 data centers, 2 here in the States, 1 in Pennsylvania, 1 in Utah. We protect over an exabyte of data. It's one of the largest private data center networks in the world. But if anybody wants any more information about that, obviously you could reach out to Liz and her team. So when we talk about the evolution of what cybersecurity really looks like, it really has transformed into what we call cyber resiliency. So we'll get into what that means, but you know, I think a lot of folks understand the need for cybersecurity, but there's still a mindset out there that this is some form of commodity that you can buy, right? You hear a lot of commercials on TV, on YouTube, wherever you're getting, you know, your entertainment, you'll see commercials about cybersecurity, and it really, you know, there's a vendor kind of pitch to it that we can protect you, but really it comes down to a multi-layered approach that includes buy-in from everyone on the team and a constant evaluation, because the criminals are evolving very quickly, the security space is evolving very quickly. So it very well could be things you put in place 2-3 years ago now need to be looked at again. And so, you know, it does sound a little bit cliched as we're talking about technology and security, but it really does start with the culture of your office, with the people within the office. Over 95% of all data loss and all downtime occurs because of user error. So you could have all the great technology in the world. If everyone in the organization isn't familiar with not only the technology itself, but the processes that have to follow this, the criminals will find that weakest link. They will find the one weak, you're only as secure as that weakest employee, or even down to the weakest device that you have, the weakest endpoint. And so you have the people that buy into it, but there also has to be a defined process to this. Coming out of this webinar, I think one of the biggest things to really think about is if you don't have a formalized incident response plan in place, you need to start working on that right now. And that is going to start out with, you know, protecting your business, but also what are the steps that folks need to take? If somebody clicks on an email and now has encrypted the entire office with ransomware, what does that first phone call look like? How do you isolate that machine? Because I can tell you panic sets in. And in my last job, if I clicked on something I wasn't supposed to, my first reaction probably wasn't going to be to go walk down the hallway and go tell my boss. I'm going to try to figure it out myself. I'm going to panic and call a friend. And that's what happens. And the longer that these guys can get into that network, the more damage they can cause. And when I talk about processes, I mean, one of the things that I think at one point will be the law of the land, which is multi-factor authentication, is a great tool. It drastically reduces the threat of an attack occurred. I saw a stat in a presentation I gave last week with the gentleman said that that's actually about a 99% success rate in terms of stopping these attacks. But it still requires user input to this. I can give you a real life story. A partner of ours, they had a client who installed multi-factor authentication. This was prior to them coming on as a client. And they go through the process. They have this little sales training piece of it, and away they go. Well, the very first weekend that they installed multi-factor authentication, the CEO of the company was out with his family out at the park or something like that, and gets a notification on his phone. Did you try to sign in? And he said yes, because he didn't really go through the training. He didn't really pay attention. He wanted to get this off his phone because he was taking pictures of his kids or whatever it was. So now the technology didn't fail. It was the people that failed. It was the fact that there wasn't proper protocol in place. And so before we even start with technology, it really does come down to that. As you're putting together an incident response plan, make sure that you're getting buy-in from all the different departments. What systems are we using? A lot of times one department's not talking to the other department. Who has access to these things? All of this needs to be documented. And so there's a lot of different frameworks out there that you can follow. At Data, we follow the NIST framework. But again, this isn't necessary. I think the takeaway is find a framework that works for you, whether it's CIS, whether it's zero trust, something within that, and follow that. And that's what drives your cyber resiliency plan. When we look at what NIST is doing, essentially what it's saying is your first step is to identify the risks. Let's take a look at where critical business data lives. Let's take a look at who has access to this. What are the protections? What is being backed up where? And from there, you'll do kind of a gap analysis and say, okay, well, we're not meeting all of these goals. That's where we're going to start to go in to the protection side. Let's go in and do an evaluation. What can we be doing to protecting all of these assets? And that takes care of the cybersecurity side of things. Now, if you watched last year, the FBI director is on the floor of Congress and he's getting grilled about the attack, right? Rightly so. But what he was very honest in saying was, there's no one can look you in the eye and say you are 100% protected from the threats that are happening now and the ones that are going to happen tomorrow. Again, there's user error involved. And again, these criminals continue to evolve. So the real question then becomes, okay, if something were to get through, how quickly am I able to detect that that attack has occurred? Because a lot of times these folks will sit in your systems for weeks or longer, gaining access to everything they need to get access to before they detonate a ransomware attack or before they come in and say, hey, we're going to sell your data unless you give us X amount of money. So the detection part is critical. Then it's how quickly can you respond to this? Okay, we've identified an attack. How quickly do we respond to this? This comes into that incident response plan. And then ultimately, how quickly are we able to recover? Because the ultimate goal is here not to say, okay, I never lost data or I was able to recover, but instead, how long did that take us? Because right now, every minute that you're down is costing your business money. So now if you're looking at, a day to recover or even a week, I'll tell you a presentation I gave last year with the Department of Homeland Security, their stat was the average length of downtime before a business is truly back up to a production environment after a ransomware attack was 16.2 days. So when you're looking at this circle here, think about that taking now 16 days from the moment that you knew the attack occurred before your systems are back up and running. That's where the leverage comes from that these criminals have. They know that you can't absorb that downtime. Whether you are a Fortune 500 company or a two-man nonprofit, everyone is tied to that. And it's good. I mean, this is where the ability to be able to communicate online and do all these things has helped obviously survive the last 2 years. But now there's so much low-hanging fruit for these criminals. And so one of the kinds of ways that we look at it is look through those 5 little steps, right? The identification, the protection, where do this cybersecurity and where does the cyber resiliency fit in, right? On the front end, you're looking at putting together the processes that need to occur, making sure you're getting the buy-in, you're putting the technology in place so that you're identifying all these risks and how are we going to protect that. But what we like to look at all of these attacks is what happens on the left-hand side of the boom and what's going to happen on the right-hand side of the boom. So really what we're doing is we're looking at, as in the technology space, we're identifying, we're protecting. At that same time, the criminals are doing their own reconnaissance on everybody. We all give so much information freely on the internet. You can find out a lot about me by going to my LinkedIn profile, right? Where I used to work, where I went to college, when I graduated, all of these different types of things. We all do that. You have to in order to succeed, but criminals are using that. It's a lot easier than sending out the mass email that looks very, very fake. Now, instead of doing that, you're sending out a targeted email that's hopefully looking like every other email in your inbox. So they deliver that. Whether it gets through or not, all of a sudden now it does get through and the boom occurs. This is the exploitation. What is happening? Well, when they get through, again, I mentioned the first thing you're gonna do is they're gonna try to install as many different viruses as they can. They're gonna try to do that quietly. That's where the detection comes into play. How quickly are we detecting that somebody has infiltrated our network? Now they're accessing command and control, and that's when they're going in and making changes and locking things up. That's where you're responding to this. You want to get ahead of that. And then that action on the objective on their end is, okay, pay me my money. Whether it is a ransom of just encryption, that they didn't really steal the data, they just encrypted it. Or whether they are actually did steal the data and are going to go sell that, whether it's on the dark web, whether there's public records and they're going to blast that out publicly. In that moment of time, you've got to get that cleaned up and get everybody up into that production environment. So this is the cyber resiliency circle. This is what the criminals are doing on their end at every step. And this is where us in the technology space are kind of trying to combat that. And it does come down again, the people are involved all throughout every one of these steps. And the government is taking a harder stance on it. This is what we said in terms of an attack. You're not supposed to pay the ransom. Now, it's not illegal to pay a ransom payment. Somebody stole my dog today. I can pay a ransom legally and get my dog back. The reason why they are putting out the statement now that's actually official from the Treasury Department that you're at risk of violating the law is because a lot of times these folks are terrorist organizations. They are enemy nation states. And so by inadvertently, by paying this ransom, you can now be funding one of these terrorist organizations. There's actually legislation in Congress right now that I believe will pass that will say that if you do pay the ransom, you have to report that within 48 hours. You have to actually report the payment itself and have tracking for it. So one of the reasons why a lot of the small businesses don't report these attacks is, one, they know the government's not going to put much resources into a $10,000 ransomware ask. They just don't have the bandwidth. But more importantly, they don't want the bad publicity. They want to be able to just say, let me just pay the ransom, get everybody back up and running, and not let my clients and my competitors know that I've just been breached. That's one of the things. So there's more and more requirements. Right now, it's kind of based on industry and state by state. But now they're even saying if you pay, you have to now report that. I actually was on a webinar with a group, they do compliancy, and they actually showed me there's a list that some of these states have that basically will list out every single business that's been attacked, how many records were stolen, so that you can do some research. So it does become a competitive kind of aspect of your job as well, of your business, of your reputation of your business. You don't want to be on that list. So that's where the government's coming down. They're basically saying, look, all these regulations are not helping to catch these guys. They're not helping to stop the attacks. They're putting the burden on you as the business owner and saying it's your responsibility to protect all that data, because if not only are we going to ask for documentation, not only ask for money in terms of fines, we're also going to publicize this stuff. So you better be protected. And, we've been in this disaster recovery space for 15 years now, and we've been doing our own studies in terms of ransomware, because it's been a big deal for us since I've been at Datto 7 years. It's always been a main talking point. And as the years have gone on, we've seen more and more folks attending webinars like this, which is great. But within our studies, we've seen the same type of trends, essentially. Now, we did see an uptick last year in attacks on the healthcare industry. Why is that? Well, they're opportunistic, these criminals. And what industry had more pressure on it over the last 2 years in the healthcare industry, right? So they go after that. But I think when you take a step back and you look at these numbers, what it really shows you is that every single industry is vulnerable. The false sense of security of, hey, I'm a small business, I don't have a lot of valuable data, is really what the criminals are relying upon. Because to be honest with you, they're going to have a much higher success rate attacking thousands of businesses, essentially indiscriminately, knowing that they're going to have a higher success rate of getting through, but also a higher success rate of paying the ransom, because they cannot absorb 16.2 days of downtime. If somebody attacks the city of Baltimore, like we saw, the city of Baltimore is not going to pay, and they're going to absorb a lot more than what a business can absorb. When they got attacked, their math was, okay, pay me $75,000 in ransom. They didn't. They restored. They were down for 3 weeks, and it cost the city of Baltimore $18 million to remediate that problem. A small business can't absorb that type of stuff, so that's why they pay. So they like that. And when you look at, again, the evolution and the future of where we're looking at here, we talked to the businesses that were attacked, that a breach did occur. We saw that about 6 in 10 of them did have anti-malware filtering in place. A lot of them had endpoint detection, antivirus, all of these different types of things. Not to say that this shouldn't be part of your cyber resiliency plan. It's a necessity, but it shows you that it's not the end all be all. You can't rely on one particular product. I wouldn't dare say to you, okay, you have a Datto, don't worry about security. It needs to be part of your overall plan, right? That's where, working with a third party like Liz, who goes out and vets all these vendors and puts together that stack of security products, makes a lot of sense. But this is the kind of number that we're looking at here. These are the folks that are getting attacked. But the real impact of all of these attacks, again, wasn't necessarily the risk of losing data. It was the loss of productivity. It was the amount of downtime. This is where the number really comes from. And I can remember 2018 going up on stage and reporting on these facts that we got from our study. And the numbers that we came back with was, okay, the average ransom payment, and we were just looking at the small business community, It's only $4,300, not enough to break the bank. The average impact was 10 times higher, $46,000, right? This is the screen where everybody take out their cameras and take a picture of it because they'll remember those stats. Look at where these numbers have gone. The amount they're asking for is relatively stagnant, but in North America, the average ransomware attack cost a small business about $300,000. I was on a webinar with our chief information security officer last week, and he gave a lot more aggressive numbers than that. Over $1 million. The FBI will tell you it's over $1 million per attack. The same thing goes for if you talk to cybersecurity insurance agencies. Because the impact is so large, we are seeing the cybersecurity insurance industry start to drop coverage at a significant rate. They are deeming a lot of businesses uninsurable if they cannot truthfully fill out this application and prove that there are ongoing processes in place. That the insurance industry on the cyber side lost money last year. The insurance industry does not lose money year over year. So they are going to find a way to correct that. And one of the things is obviously increasing premiums to protect themselves, but also deeming a lot of businesses uninsurable. So when you look at all of these things, there's a lot of ripple effects to putting together that incident response plan. And sitting down and looking at an application like an insurance policy is really good. But you have to also understand that the goal is not to just check off the boxes, it's to understand why the box is there in the first place. And so when you start looking at the impacts to one of these attacks, you've got reputational impacts, you've got clear financial impact, the impact on productivity and the potential lost business. And then you have the regulations that come down, and then you have things like being uninsurable. It really starts to spiral. But if you can produce an incident response plan and show that you're doing your due diligence on this plan, there's ongoing training going on, I could tell you that will save you a lot of headaches, even if you are attacked, having all those things in place. And the scariest stat from this really was this one. When we talked to business owners, only 30% of them were highly concerned about this ransomware epidemic, which is a multi-billion-dollar a year industry. Actually, I saw a stat at another seminar where they said that if you were to group together all of the cybercrime money that's accumulated year over year, it would actually be the 9th largest economy in the world, just ahead of Canada and Brazil. That's the kind of money that we're up against. So when the criminals see a stat like this, I could tell you, when we get the 2021 numbers back, they're going to be through the roof. It was a successful year for the criminals because they know this. And the scarier part of this number in 2019 was 41%. It's going in the wrong direction. And so as we're seeing that, these criminals will follow the path of least resistance. If you could be in that 30%, you can put together these security measures in place and put together an incident response plan. They're looking at volume. They're salespeople. Look at them as salespeople. They got to hit their quota of how many attacks they have to get through. They're going to go for the low-hanging fruit. So putting these processes in place will also make you less of a target. So when we look at this impact, when you get the boom, right? In terms of backup, in terms of disaster recovery, we look at 2 acronyms, and there's a million acronyms in technology, right? But these 2 really apply to what we're talking about. And that's the recovery point objective, that RPO on the left-hand side of the screen, and your recovery time objective, the right-hand side of the screen. The left-hand side of the screen is really just saying, okay, how much data am I really at risk of losing at any given time? Am I taking daily backups? Okay, then I'm saying that if I lost a day's worth of data, it's not enough to break the bank. Some people, highly transactional, obviously has to be hourly or every 15 minutes. But within that incident response plan, you have to be able to identify what's my recovery point objective, and am I meeting that objective? And again, is somebody proactively testing those backups? Who's in charge of that? All that needs to be in there because the government and the insurance industry, they're all going to be looking at that. Okay, so who's responsible for this? How is that training going? Okay, that's the right-hand side screen. And ultimately, that's the first piece of leverage that these folks have when they attack you. If you're not backing up and you're not testing your backups, you're not doing it frequently enough. Now they've encrypted your data and you've lost a few days. They know that they've got you, or you're not backing up your data at all. You have no other recourse but to pay. But they do know that most businesses, they're backing up their data in some form or fashion. And a lot of times they are hitting that RPO goal. So the focus then becomes that remember that this on that side, there's that right-hand side of the boom. How quickly can you recover? Would that be a day, a week, 16 days? You have to define what your RTO goal is, and are you meeting that goal? Now, obviously, your RTO goal pie in the sky is going to be 1 minute, right? But let's put a realistic number on that, and can we meet that goal? So when you look at what that looks like, you talk about the idea of business continuity and continuity of operations. It is a change in mindset to what happens after an attack, what happens on that right-hand side of the boom. Now, traditional backup, Jim down the hall clicks on an email he's not supposed to, you get the scary red screen. Well, the mindset is, okay, I got to go get a new server. I got to go put it in place. Obviously, with supply chain issues, or you don't snap your fingers and get a new server in place. In the meantime, once that's in place, we're going to start restoring that data. And then after that restoration's occurred, hopefully we're back up and running. That's kind of the traditional cybersecurity mindset. I've got my backup. Eventually, I'll get that data back. But if you're really trying to be resilient to this and avoid paying the ransom and shorten that downtime, your first reaction needs to be, I have to get everybody back up and running. And so whereas traditional backup, that file and folder style backup, looks at it, I mean, it's the same way things were done, 30 years ago. At the end of the day, it's a copy of files and folders. Business continuity and that idea of cyber resiliency, you want to have a full image of that server. You want to capture the operating systems, everything. Take that image and store that in multiple geographical locations. So now it gives you the ability to do a couple of things, right? So you get that base image of whatever that full server is. You sit down, you create that RPO schedule. Okay, it needs to be hourly. Let's set up that backup schedule. So those are all going along automatically, trying to take user error out of it, testing those backups, offsite syncs, all those things. But what's happening is it's not taking a full backup every hour. It's just looking at two different points in time and what those changes are occurring. It allows you to do a couple things. One is you're setting up what's called an inverse chain, where now all of those data points, they're independent of one another. All right. So if you are attacked at 11 o'clock, you know that 10 o'clock backup is safe, which is critical because the criminals will get in there and they'll try to infiltrate that backup and encrypt that backup so that when you do try to restore, okay, well, they've got my backup data as well. You want to eliminate that. It also gives you, and you go back to the detection side, you can actually detect ransomware as it's occurring, because you can't really follow all of the variants that are out there. There's new ones popping up every hour. So that's very difficult. But at the end of the day, they're all leaving the same footprint. Once all of these files start changing all at once, it's going to jump off the screen and create an alert that says, hey, we've been tracking all these backups. Here's the normal data set changes. Here's the amount of files that are normally changed within any given data set point. Now all of a sudden everything has changed all at once. This is the footprint that all of these attacks leave. It's going to send out a notification and also say, hey, here's the last clean backup. But what it ultimately gives you the ability to do is now, instead of saying, okay, I've been attacked, let's go order a new server, your first reaction is now make a call over to Liz and her team, right? They would spin up what's called a virtual instance of that server. This would be operating off of this server. This would be operating as your server. Everyone who had access would have access to this. You'd have access to all your tools. You'd be in this state for several hours, days, weeks. It's a true production environment. So now within your office, everybody is servicing the clients they need to while there's forensics being done on that device, seeing if anything's been stolen, figuring out what we're going to do. We're going to wipe this clean, or we're going to replace it altogether. Meanwhile, for the most part, people within your office don't even know that that's occurred. They're sitting in their desk, they're sitting in front of their computer, getting access to everything they need. And now when you're ready to restore, there is a new server in place. Now you're getting back to where you were, not when the scary red screen popped up, but instead to the moment that that new server is ready to be ready to receive that data. So you're reducing that downtime on the front end and the back end. Now you're talking about minutes or hours. You're turning one of these attacks into an inconvenience as opposed to a business threatening event, right? It's a few phone calls and maybe an hour or two of downtime and you're back up and running. This now fits into that cybersecurity, cyber resiliency, incident response plan conversation, because now you're able to identify what those RPO goals and RTO goals are, and are they being met? And how do you know they're being met? You need to have reporting behind that. So, I mean, in the case of Datto, this is all tested every single night. So every single night it's brought up to a boot screen. So you know that that data is bootable, so that you know you have access to it. And ultimately that geo redundancy is critical as well, because when you talk about cybersecurity and downtime, yes, the vast majority of it is through attacks, but you also do have hardware failures. You also do have natural disasters. So, you want to have that geo redundancy. You want to have these capabilities from anywhere, whether that on-premise device is compromised. I mentioned the 2 data centers we have. We've got one in Pennsylvania, one in Utah, same exact capabilities. And I'll leave you with this, and it's kind of a teaser because I know there's another webinar coming up in a few weeks with about Microsoft 365 and some of that data. And again, the way that we've communicated has changed, and thank goodness that these tools are available, even though as annoying as they could be. Nobody calls my cell phone anymore. Everything's a Zoom invite, right? Everything's a GoToMeeting or Teams. That's just the way of the world right now. And in the IT space, we knew this was coming. It's just a matter of how fast it would accelerate, and the pandemic really accelerated that. But there are attacks being that are occurring on these applications, these software as a server applications. When we looked at the managed service providers that we talked to, we had about 1 in 4 said that, yeah, they had clients whose Microsoft 365 instances were attacked. We also saw it with Dropbox, Google Workplace, these different types of things. And you set up Google searches, you will see. And if you've impacted any, had an impact from any downtime, I'm sure you know about it. But again, it's not because Microsoft isn't secure. These aren't brute force attacks onto Microsoft Cloud. It's still relying upon user error. And they've got the shared responsibility model. Almost every vendor that you work with will have this. But yeah, we're going to protect the integrity of our cloud. But that data that lives within it, that's your responsibility as the tenant. So we do share responsibility. Microsoft will come out and openly say that. I've sat on panels with their engineers. They will talk about it. Go to your SLAs, go to their user agreements, go to their forums. They'll talk about the need to protect that data and also the need to back up that data. And I'll tell you a quick story before we wrap up and if any questions come in. There's a gentleman by the name of Kevin Mitnick, at one point, FBI's most wanted list, really one of the most notorious hackers in the world. He was caught back in the 90s, went to jail, came out. Now he works with the good guys. And we hired him. Now it's going on 3 years ago. It was June of 2019. And he created a live virus. He said, if I was still a bad guy, this is exactly what I would be doing. And he showed the demo up on stage. And it was essentially an email came in, looks like Anti-Spam Pro. Okay, you sit through a webinar like this, cyber resiliency, I got to be secure. Click the accept button. Now every single email has been encrypted. And I go back to who has access to what. If you have admin access, this can now infiltrate the entire domain. The only email you can open is the one from Kevin asking for that money in Bitcoin. So these attacks are occurring. And think about this technology, this kind of virus that he talked about, that was June of 2019. You don't think that these criminals have now evolved those attacks. So I'm sure they're much more complicated and harder to track and all the rest. So this is what we're seeing. We're continuing to see attacks on that. So with that, I'll bring you back on, Liz. You want to add any feedback on that, or we're getting some questions in, feel free.
Thank you so much, Mike. You did such a good job. We did have a few questions roll in. One was, the most recent one was about this app protection. It says, I do have a current backup solution in place, but does that mean my email and apps are not being backed up as well?
If you've got if it's an Exchange server on site, chances are that's being backed up. But the vast majority of email services now are cloud-based. They're in that software as a service application. They are not being backed up unless you have a separate server. So that is a separate backup because it's now living in a SaaS environment. And that should go into your incident response plan. If you take an inventory, and you'll be surprised if you take an inventory of where all your data lives and how many SaaS applications your company has, and you really track that, you find out who has access to what, and then where is that data being backed up. It really needs to be addressed.
Okay, and then the second question that came in is, what do you suggest is the best protection against ransomware?
Well, I mean, the obvious answer is training, because that's how they're usually getting in. But I think the critical piece on ransomware is the detection piece of it, right? And there's a lot of great products out there in terms of how you're detecting that. And then essentially the cybersecurity, the cyber resiliency piece that we talked about. If you're really going to combat the leverage that these guys have, it's your ability to go and get back up and running. Because if you're able to do that and it's a traditional ransomware attack, you really have no reason to pay, because you're back up and running, you're going to have access to your data. So it addresses that. And you can keep, you don't have to set up a Bitcoin account because you don't have to pay that. So there is a lot of great tools on the detection side of things and monitoring of that, whether you could isolate that. And then if they do get through, that resiliency is the key to this.
Okay, awesome. That is unfortunately all the time we have for today. I think I had 1 or 2 more questions come through, but I will send out an email with the answers to those. Thank you so much, Mike, for your presentation. You are always so great and informative. And thank you everybody for joining us. We hope everybody has a productive day.
Thank you so much.